Hello, everybody. Welcome to Daily Kos. This is the brief. This is our weekly show about politics. I am your co-host, Marcos Melissas. I am here with Carrie Eleveld. Today, we're going to be talking about the youth vote. When an election is as tight as the one in 2020, from the presidency on down to myriad House races, Senate races, to the runoff election in Georgia, everyone is the reason that we won. In Georgia, for example, the Latino population is small, but their turnout was within the margin of victory. Biden won the state by 11,000 votes. Same with the Asian community, Black voters, urban voters, women, including white women in the suburbs who used to vote Republican. There's a lot of credit to go around, but it also means that we need to do heavy lifting to keep winning and turning out that vote. If one of those groups feels disaffected or neglected, our thin, and it's very thin, our thin winning coalition becomes seriously in danger. Today, we are going to look at the youth vote, how important it was in 2020, how critical it will be in 2022 to have any chance of retaining control of both chambers of Congress, much less in a ideal situation, increasing our margins, our majorities in those chambers so that we can have one that makes Senator Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema maybe not obsolete, but at least irrelevant. We would get rid of the filibuster. We can make DC a state. We can get real voting reforms. So those are the things that are on the table. And to make that happen, we need everybody to turn out. But in that bucket, we need the youth vote to turn out. So to talk about that later on in the show, we're going to have Ben Wessel. He's the former executive director of NextGen America, an organization focused on the youth turnout. So we have this is going to be a difficult task, Carrie. And really, when we talk about a winning coalition, like our coalition is fragile. So many critical pieces to it, and we can't lose any of it. And that's the danger that we have.
That's danger, of course. I mean, the good news is that Republicans aren't competing for any of our coalition. So it's about us like making sure that we keep them engaged and getting them out to vote. But it's not like Republicans are like, gee, maybe if we did this could, win over a few more persuasion votes. I mean, that's just not a thing. Like Republicans just don't believe in that anymore and just have, decided that their, minority rule is their way of the future. So
yeah, definitely they're doubling down on minority rule. That's why they're working so hard to create voting impediments in so many states to keep people from voting because they don't want to actually have to work to win young voters or Latinos or Black voters or suburban voters.
Coming up with new ideas?
Suburban voters. So
no way. No new ideas.
Speaking of new ideas, though, it's not policy idea. This isn't the policy. That would be crazy, right? No. Their new idea is if House Republicans take the majority next year, that they will try to make Donald Trump Speaker of the House. Now, you may be asking yourself, how could Donald Trump be Speaker of the House? He's not a member of the House, and there is no indication that he would run for a seat.
I know Kevin McCarthy is asking himself, how could Donald Trump be Speaker of the House when I'm going to be Speaker of the House if we win the majority? That's what McCarthy is saying on the inside. On the inside, he is freaking out. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, please. This is a fun fact of American constitutional law. Not even law, just the American Constitution. There is no qualification to be Speaker of the House. Anybody can be Speaker of the House if they get the votes. You got to still win an election for Speaker. And historically, Ted Cruz has gotten votes from the Crazy Caucus in the past. Colin Powell has gotten votes, protest votes in the past. So we've had non-members of the House get votes, and it's totally legit. Now, nobody's ever won as Speaker because, being Speaker, you got to build a coalition. You got to help people get elected. You collect some favors. You raise money. And it's just always been assumed that the Speaker would be a member of the House. But it's not required. And now we have a Republican Party that is utterly, enraptured by Donald Trump they can't function without Donald Trump,
and completely spineless.
Completely spineless. And so some wingnut right-wing radio personality asked Donald Trump if he would be interested in being Speaker of the House. And of course, not only did Donald Trump he's like, what? I can make, like, that sounds really interesting. He said something like that, like, sounds really interesting. But then Kevin McCarthy, who's the House Republican leader, admitted on Fox and Friends that Donald Trump has talked to him multiple times about it. So it's drilling into his head, and he's going to start obsessing about it. And he doesn't want to do the work of becoming Speaker, right? But he wants it handed to him like he's the king. He expects that. And so there is...
And frankly, if he asks for it, he could easily, he might get it. I mean,
there is
that's not beyond reason.
Chance he can get it. It would depend on a couple of factors. It would depend on the size of the House majority. I mean, if we're talking a 3-seat Republican majority, that likely won't happen. I mean, we had 20 Republicans that voted to impeach the second time. So presumably a bunch of those will lose primaries. Some of them will be redistricted out. They'll be churned, but presumably enough will survive that if it's a narrow House majority, that Donald Trump wouldn't have the votes. But if it's a wave, and historically the minority party picks up around 30 seats in the House in that first midterm of a new president. So if there was a historically analogous election, which means just it followed historical patterns, they probably would have the votes to make Donald Trump Speaker of the House.
Now is when I would like to jump in and challenge your original assertion that this is a fun fact of the American Constitution. Is it really fun? Is it? Or is it downright terrifying? That's what I want to know. Is it terrifying or fun?
It wouldn't be terrifying if Colin Powell became Speaker of the House in a Republican majority.
But we're talking about Donald Trump.
It's not
Speaker of the House.
Yeah, no, it's not the Constitution that's terrifying. It's the fact that Republicans think and are openly contemplating, and Donald Trump is clearly promoting privately this idea that he would make sense. And there's actually a fantasy. There's actually a plan. Let me tell you the plan, because this is it. I mean, you think this is already nuts. It gets even more nuts. This is from Steve Bannon. You all remember Steve Bannon? Should be in prison, but he was pardoned by Trump. He's actively promoting this whole Donald Trump as Speaker of the House. And what he says is that Donald Trump would come in, but only for 100 days. And he would use those 100 days to pass policy. And we could all laugh, right? Pass policy. But also impeach Joe Biden because, Steve Bannon says, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And because it's just it is what it, let's just impeach because that's what happened to Trump. There was no reason for the impeachment.
They did it to us, and so we're going to do it to them.
Right. So they're going to, so Trump is going to come in, and in 100 days, he's going to pass this sweeping new Republican agenda. And then he's going to impeach Joe Biden, and then he can hand things over to McCarthy so that Trump can run for president.
If they impeach Joe Biden, do we get to have an insurrection at the Capitol? Do the Democrats get to have an insurrection in order to, if they impeach him? Since Donald Trump had to impeach in order to be, or had to have the insurrection in order to be impeached.
And it's no big deal, right?
I'm wondering if we retroactively get to have an insurrection because
Carrie, it wouldn't be an insurrection. It would be like just going on vacation. We would be just like tourists.
A national day of tourism at the Capitol.
At the Capitol. That is what we would do. So, but this is real. This is a thing. Trump as Speaker. It's a thing. And we haven't seen Donald Trump speak about this publicly yet. And today, his spokesperson denied that Trump wants to be Speaker, which, how many times did they try to gaslight us during the Trump presidency where Trump would say something and the spokesperson would be like, Trump never said that, even if it was on video. So clearly it's a thing that people are asking about, they're talking about. It's Steve Bannon and other, I'm sure Michael Flynn, that crowd is heavily pushing this in those circles. And Trump just loves the idea of being in the center of attention. And so we have this really interesting dynamic, Carrie, and both of us have written about this, that the reason an incumbent president loses an average of 30 seats in the House is because that midterm election, that first midterm election, becomes a referendum on that brand new president. And given how our system works or doesn't work because of the filibuster and, all sorts of checks and balances, the people that elected that president end up being demoralized and the opposition is activated, right? That's why we had the Tea Party. That's why we had the resistance against Donald Trump. And so that is normally what drives those big historical swings in power in the House. So to just reiterate, you need a demoralized base for the majority, and you need an energized base for the minority. But we've written about this. This is looking a little different, right? We don't have a mass uprising against Joe Biden. And if they want to put Donald Trump on the ballot figuratively, could that again make this a referendum on Donald Trump, therefore motivating our voters like they did in 2019, 18, 17, and the Georgia runoff?
Look, Trump is by far a bigger motivator for our people than, this is why Joe Biden won the election, is because Trump is a bigger motivator for both Democrats and anti-Trumpers than he actually is for pro-Trump Republicans. I think, look, we have also talked about how we are in ahistorical times. So we don't know. No one would have said, oh yeah, Democrats are going to win those 2 runoff elections in Georgia in January, right? The Senate elections. No one was betting that. I mean, no, if anyone had said in, say, like this time last year, I think Democrats are going to end up winning both those Senate seats in Georgia, people would have laughed them out of the room.
I wrote that and people did laugh at me.
I laugh at you regularly, so I'm sure I laughed when you wrote that. No, I'm just kidding.
I actually thought we'd win more Senate races, so I can brag about getting Georgia right, and then we can look at Kansas and Montana, and you can laugh at me getting those wrong. So I'm not saying I'm some kind of perfect savant.
No.
I got lucky. But
you got, yes. good lucky. That's the type of lucky we like. It's good lucky. But so you should write more of those pie in the sky pieces, because we need them. Put it out in the universe and see what comes back at us. But I just think, like, there's no way we have any way of knowing. What we do know is, Biden's, just real talk for a second, Biden's approval rating was humming along right around mid 50s, right? 54, 55% based on the 538 compilation and the aggregate. And now he's ticked down a little bit. He's more like low 50s. It's not crazy. It's just, we're seeing a little bit of a few points few points here and there starting to drop off. Okay. I think that, what we want, of course, is Biden, since it's going to be a referendum on Biden, what we want, of course, is for his approval rating to stay as high as possible. So any approval rating he has right now is neither here nor there in terms of the overall picture when we get to, a year and a half from now. But it does suggest that there's a little bit of a cooling off in terms of, as negotiations over the jobs and infrastructure bill drag on, as, Democrats aren't able to deliver on the voting rights bill, at least not yet. A number of things like that it might not be, that a little bit of the honeymoon period, whatever honeymoon period there was, is starting to just wane a touch, right? Mm-hmm. So I also don't think that there's going to be, wide swings back and forth, hopefully, the way we used to have. It just, our electorate isn't like that anymore. What I also think, the other thing we can't account for is the November elections happened before the January 6th insurrection. They happened before this full-on broadside attack on democracy by Republican-led legislatures across the country. They happened before President Biden, his White House, his administration had gotten the pandemic largely under control. So there's nothing normal about what we have now between last November and the 2022 midterm election. And I hesitate to say we know anything about anything at this point, other than these are very ahistorical times. I have a hard time believing that we're going to end up, having some sort of 30 seat, win for Republicans. The state of their party at this point is they have watched Donald Trump repel enough people to lose the presidency, enough people, even their own people who voted down ballot for Republicans, but voted against Trump at the top. And they have seen that and said, we want more Donald Trump. He's going to be our guy, and we're going to do more of him, not less of him. We're going to become him as a party, which is what they've done. And I just don't think there's any precedent for any of this. Like, we just don't know.
No, they are going out of their way to make 2022 a referendum on Donald Trump. And now they're literally going to put him on the ballot. Now, figuratively put him on the ballot that if they win the House, Donald Trump becomes Speaker. There is, I guess, some logic to that. And that logic is that their turnout is higher when Donald Trump is literally on the ballot. They can actually show up and vote for him. Can they get some of that turnout by promising Speaker Trump? Can the Trump deplorables, the hidden deplorables, can they make that connection that they're not literally voting for Donald Trump, but they're voting to make Donald Trump Speaker? I don't know. That seems maybe a lift too hard.
Are you telling me that Kevin McCarthy, who wants to be Speaker so bad, he wakes up in the morning thinking about it as soon as consciousness hits his little brain, and goes to bed at night, and as soon as with his head hitting the pillow and dreams of speakership dream clouds pop up from his brain? Do you really think that Kevin McCarthy is going to go around making the pledge? Because you can tell that he isn't super fond of this idea based on how he responded to that question.
Yeah, he told Trump that he wanted Trump to be president, and he was going to be Speaker if they win. He told Trump to back off, but in a way that maybe Trump is okay with, by saying, but you can still be president.
So I just can't imagine. I mean, this would be one more thing that would throw a wrench in their 2022 message, right? If Trump starts talking about this incessantly, I mean, God only knows that Mitch McConnell does not want Trump as Speaker of the House, right? That's just one more huge headache for him, whether they take the majority in the Senate or not. And I just can't imagine that Kevin McCarthy is going to go around making the pledge that, sure, if we win the majority, I'm going to hand the speakership over to Donald Trump. I cannot imagine in a million years that he will do that. So that will just be one more, schism, friction, one more piece of consternation and friction in the Republican Party.
Absolutely. This is not a positive development for them. And we haven't seen Trump talk about this publicly yet. So this will be interesting to see if he actually starts using it as part of his whatever errands or grievances that he does at his rallies. He will be going on tour with Bill O'Reilly, funny enough, later in the year, I think starting in November. And so that would be he'll have all summer to stew on this and to, and see if he really likes it. I know.
God, man, can you imagine him starting a campaign on that? Oh my God.
Yeah. So this is going to be, and actually, if we get a chance to make 2022 about Donald Trump, like we did in 2018, our chances of surviving this and maybe even increasing our majorities are dramatically higher. And I will never understand, we've talked about this before, we've both written about it, why they insist on sticking with a person who's been deplatformed, who people have, his blog was a hilarious disaster. And people have moved on, and the Republican Party just can't quit him. So Carrie,
I know you want to do this, but before we do, let's handicap Trump as Speaker of the House. You've thought on a scale from Trump getting reinstated in August as president, which is 0 chances, right? On a scale from 0 to Trump becoming Speaker of the House, what are the chances at 100%? That's 0 to 100%.
Okay.
What are the chances?
I would say chances of Republicans taking the House are probably 50-50. I should say like 60-40, but it's so in a normal year, it'd be like 90-10. But this is such a weird political climate that I actually think we have a fighting chance. I really honestly do. So I would say 50-50, maybe 60-40 Republicans. And then it becomes a question of how big that majority is. So either they're going to get the wave. I don't think they're going to claw a bunch of like seats and get like +5. I think either sentiment, our base is going to shut down and they crush us, or our base will turn out and we survive, and maybe we're not going to win a massive wave election, but maybe we eke out an extra couple of seats from the Republicans. So I would say that if they win, they probably win big. And so I would put the chances at that point of, in a Republican House, Trump being Speaker, maybe like 60-40. So if you all that up, it's probably a 30% chance, about 25% chance, 25-30% chance that it actually
You heard it here, 25% chance. That Marcos Malitzis just did all the math for us. 25% chance, very statistically sound.
No, but
analysis.
It's a real chance. It's a real chance. Like we have learned, Carrie, as a movement, I hope, that we can't underestimate Donald Trump.
Or the Republican Party. There's really just no bar low enough for the Republican Party. So
if he decides he wants that and they get their wave, I think it's going to be pretty hard for Republicans to not make him Speaker. They'll know it's a disaster, but I don't see how they resist him, because they've shown no ability to resist him when he has no power, when he has no audience.
just as an example, the most recent commission, the January 6th commission, they laid out their criteria for that. The Democrats said, okay, here's your criteria. We'll give you everything you want. And then Trump came out against the bill and said, I don't want the commission. And then Republicans killed it, even though Democrats met all their demands. So, anyway, go ahead. Let's bring in our guy.
Yeah. So our guest today is Ben Wessel. He is formerly the executive director of NextGen America, which was focused on turning out the youth vote the last several cycles. Ben's he's actually kind of we've known each other for a while, so I'm pretty excited to have you on. Ben's one of the smartest people in politics, and especially so when it comes to youth votes. So I'm happy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's really fun to be a fly on the wall and just listen to you bitch and moan. I'm into it.
Well, if Trump becomes Speaker of the House, the bitch and moan quotient is going to be off the charts.
Oh my God. You ain't seen nothing yet, Ben.
I
nothing
believe it.
Yet.
I believe it. Terrifying and wonderful all at the same time.
So Ben, you had a front row seat at turning out and seeing how the youth vote performed in 2020 and how important it was. Sure. Can you sort of give us an overview of what maybe some of the numbers and how critical that was to Democratic victories in 2020?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there is no doubt that young voters are the ones who put Democrats over the edge, both in the Senate races and the presidential. Young voters are sort of our largest, most diverse pillar of the Democratic coalition, which is really exciting. So when there's like a million different ways that you can carve up young as a 32-year-old, I like to say it's 18 to 35, just to like keep myself in that nice warm bubble of youth, despite all the grays in my beard. But young voters, when you think of 18 to 29, which is how the census thinks about it, and all these smart professor types, we saw the highest turnout ever of young people in the 2020 election. Everyone remembers 2008 was this big deal where the youth were enthused by Barack Obama, and the big drum roll number for youth turnout in 2008 was about 51% of young people showed up. And that was historic and it was amazing. And we're so proud of all the work we did. Well, this year in
definitely a half full, half empty type of stat, isn't it?
I know, totally. But it means we have so much there's so much potential by investing in this cohort, right? So we far surpassed that 51% turnout. Depending on who you ask, we were somewhere between 53 to 56% of young people showed up. And part of the reason that's so interesting is because these young people, not surprisingly, are very Democratic leaning. And they supported Joe Biden by huge numbers. The numbers we see, the best estimate is about 61% of those young people voted for Joe Biden compared to 36% who voted for Donald Trump. And that was a huge improvement over 2016, right? In 2016, about 1 in 10 young people voted for a third-party candidate, which meant Hillary only got 55% of the youth vote. And so that jump from 55 to 61 or 62, depending on who you ask, that's a game changer. And in states like Arizona, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Wisconsin, where it's like tens of thousands of votes, those additional votes from new young people who showed up and from young people who were Stein voters or were Gary Johnson voters who came home to the Democratic Party and voted for Joe Biden, often, holding their nose and saying, who cares? I don't know. That's the difference maker. And it helped us down ballot in a million different examples. Mark Kelly in Arizona certainly helped with the Ossoff and Warnock races in January. It was a big deal. So young people crushed it. And I was proud to have a front row seat, as you said.
Let's bring up a graphic we have. It's a tweet that you sent out to give people a visual. Yeah, one of your tweets. Okay, you sent out this graphic, and you were talking about the share of the vote, right? And let me just run through these numbers real quick because we have a podcast audience too eventually, and just people like to tune in to hear my voice, Ben. As you can hear, it's the dulcet tones.
I like to tune in to hear your voice.
So in 2008, what this shows, this graphic shows, it's a bar graph, right? 2008, millennials and Gen Z voters, youth voters, accounted for 14% of the vote that year. And last year, that number more than doubled to millennials and Gen Z voters accounting for 31% of the total vote in the country, right? Meanwhile, you've got boomers, which have always been sort of the juggernaut, generation, right, of voters.
And very Republican,
starting to fall off a cliff. I mean, it's not quite a cliff, but it's starting to look cliffy to me at some point. But, boomers and older folks accounted for 61% of the vote in 2008. They accounted for 61% of the vote. But by 2020, they accounted for just 44% of the vote. So at the same time that you have this step ladder of the millennials and Gen Zs getting up to 31% of the vote last year, you have boomers and people older than that falling down to just 44% of the vote. And I just wonder, Ben, to get back to you now, what do you see in those numbers? I mean, at what point could this generation surpass boomers, et cetera?
Oh, I think it'll happen in the next 2, 4, 6 years. I mean,
Whoa.
Sorry for everyone older.
No. It's actually incredibly optimistic.
Well, we're in this really interesting time where, millennials, which I'm a proud millennial, even though somehow it's an insult, millennials are already the consumers that dictate corporate strategy. They're the content consumers that dictate cultural media. And finally, millennials are becoming the main political generation, the folks that you have to think about when you're making political decisions. And part of that is because millennials are so big. It's a generation 70 million strong in this country, that our parents were the baby boomers and then they had babies, and that's like a boom times a boom. And so for us, we're that core constituency that I think corporate America and cultural America has been thinking about a lot, and now political America recognizes. 2020 was really our coming out party, and we're in this moment where you have to appeal to the millennial generation in order to get anything done in a world where majority rules. Hence,
right.
As you guys were mentioning earlier, the Republican Party is not interested in this majority rule world, and they'd like to appeal to a smaller and smaller sliver of an older and older electorate to keep themselves in power. So very soon, aka now, this decade, is when the downfall of the boomer and older coalition dictating what happens in our politics happens, which is, I think, great.
Great, right? I'm on board with you. Just to also add in where Gen Xers were, because I'm a Gen Xer. Gen Xers have been cooking along at like 25, 26% flatlining. So millennials and Gen Z voters already surpassed how much a share of the vote Gen Xers are accounting for. Just so you know, right? So we're just there. We're the smaller generation of counting for 25, 26%.
And Xers are it's a very swing demographic. Not swing, it's very split demographic. If you look at how Xers vote, it's like a 50-50 Republican Democrat. You look at the older generations are heavily Republicans, not even close. And then those young generations are ridiculous. And Civics, our polling data firm, we have a 50-state tracker on Donald Trump approval, Joe Biden approval, and if only young people voted, man, this would be, I think there's 4 states left where young people are a majority Republican at this point. I think it's West Virginia,
the
Wyoming.
Republicans can have young Wyoming and young Arkansas.
Right, maybe North Dakota, I think, is one of them. Yeah, exactly. And so there is this obvious shift underway. I actually was really interested to hear you talk about how this millennial generation is sort of driving corporate preferences. I hadn't even considered that. And I was just looking at the National Review, which is a conservative magazine, and their cover story is woke corporate America. And they're crying about how woke Nike and all these,
Sure.
You've seen it in Georgia, where corporations are being driven to take stances on social issues. And of course, conservatives who loved it when corporations backed them up, now are just heavy tears. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I actually hadn't fully made that connection, and there's something there that I'm sure you can speak to.
Yeah, it's a really big shift. I think everybody is used to seeing maybe a celebrity PSA that's like, go vote, it's your duty. But we're entering an era where Coca-Cola is going to actively register voters because that's what their consumers expect of them. For good or for bad, we're entering a time where corporate conversation in the civic space really matters because they can reach so many people. And this is, of course, really important when we talk about, how our tech platforms going to engage with politics, how are these big media behemoths going to start sort of feeling like they have a responsibility or not to get people out to vote. The thing that I find most interesting is that, as a political movement, we often forget that corporate boycotts or corporate social responsibility, that can be one of our best legislative tools, right? If we can get companies on board, for example, with pushing for a clean energy package, it's a good way to move some of these swing legislators who won't listen to the people, but they'll listen to their corporate benefactors. And so I'm optimistic about the role of young people coming in and pushing these companies. I'm optimistic about the young people who work at these corporations saying we have to do things differently. But corporations have let me and the rest of us down many, many times. So fingers crossed.
So let me ask a question related to that, right?
Sure.
So first of all, these corporations, right? Number one, they're marketing to the younger voters. Number two, they want the talent pool to be working for them of the younger voters, especially in terms of coding and digitally and all that stuff, right? So they have to come off as progressive. I'm excited about the idea of them, as you say, getting out there and maybe having to register voters in order to put some skin in the game, right? But at the same time, these corporations, in particular Coca-Cola, I don't know the numbers, but they give a lot of money to Republican lawmakers. So how do they square? I mean, are they anywhere even close to being held accountable, or how do we hold them accountable for talking out of both sides of their mouths? Or conversely, this is a complicated question, is it helpful to have them going in and saying, look, you guys can't do this stuff. We give you a ton of money. And if you do this, I'm just telling you, it's going to be impossible for us to continue supporting you because you suck so bad.
I think the thing that we can count on is that corporate America is going to do what's best for corporate America. Right now, they've decided that they can play both sides. They'll max out checks to Democrats and Republicans, and that is way cheaper than ending up on the wrong side of the conversation, right? And so I don't expect them to do anything that's not profit seeking, right? They're going to continue to, like, corruption pays off. It's like pretty easy to write a little check to a senator and then have them not regulate you or whatever. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be a matter of like young people coming into these companies and changing the way that these companies do business or try to. I think there's all sorts of cool and interesting policies that we can have. I mean, this is totally not my area of expertise at all, but like, what if we mandated worker seats on corporate boards, things like that, to try and change corporate behavior? And those are the sorts of things that I think, and Marcos, I would love to see you pull some of this stuff. Like, those are the sorts of things that I think are incredibly popular with young people across the board, Democrat, Independent, and Republican. And those are the sorts of, right?
We'll do a youth poll. Let's do a youth poll.
And it's one of those things that we see. It's so interesting. There are very few Republican young people, as you mentioned earlier, but they actually tend to agree with Democratic leaning or independent leaning young people, especially on questions of corporate control, right? We need to break up big tech, for example, or we need to tax corporations at higher rates. It's an interesting and very different thing than older conservatives. And I think a lot of that is like those young people who like Donald Trump and they liked when he was railing against corporate wokeness, we can build some strange coalitions when Gen Z and millennials are the majority of the voters that we care about.
So you talked earlier about how in previous cycles there was a huge third-party vote from young people, and we know that young people don't have party allegiance the same way older people do. Does that mean that is there a risk that we lose him back to the next Jill Stein? Is there a way to lock him into the Democratic Party in a way that they can be a reliable voting constituency? Or are they always going to sort of bedevil Democrats by having that bit of I don't want to say instability that's not the right word, unpredictability?
Sure. I think this is a problem that's not going away anytime soon. I guess I'm not sure if it's a problem or not. We see, like you mentioned, Marcos, party ID super decreased with young people that says, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I'm not an independent, I'm just Ben. And part of the reason is because they've never seen Democrats or Republicans or anyone else deliver anything for them, right? This is the generation that went through 9/11, wars battled on false pretenses, the economic crash, inability to buy a house, crippling student debt, all the things that you can imagine. And so there's no sort of era of good feelings around a party. I think there's definitely, folks who are my age, who our first election was 2008. There's definitely some residual, like Obama was dope feeling, but it's more about Obama and less about Obama, the Democratic president. And so we see with young people a real willingness to try new things in a way that older folks who came up, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Reagan Republican, or I'm a Kennedy Democrat. It just doesn't happen sort of for our folks. And here's how that plays out, right? Bernie Sanders, hugely popular with young people, very famously refused to become a capital D Democrat, both in 16 and 20. We, I think, can see some strange candidacies for folks who try and run as independents who can really attract the youth vote. I'm less worried about a Jill Stein type who's coming sort of from the far left or purporting to be from the far left, getting a significant chunk of voters. And I'm like more worried about the sort of like Elon Musk cryptocurrency, burn it all down type people because there's a lot of young people who feel like they have no opportunity, and the country is run on a lottery and it's a crapshoot, and they like to screw with it, And so I think Democrats have, luckily or unluckily, a really easy playbook to follow here, which is do popular things that young people want, and then talk to young people about how we did all these popular things for you, because that's how you start to build some allegiance to a party brand rather to an individual or a candidate.
Can I just ask along those lines, why the hell hasn't the White House gone ahead and canceled $50,000 in student debt? And this is something I've written about several times now. It is, the older folks are all like, we paid off our own debt, blah, blah, blah. I'm just saying, just to be clear.
$6,000 that they paid for.
Right. I paid off my own debt too. I've only got like probably a few $1,000s to go or whatever.
Humble brag.
And I don't, I'm just letting you know that like, I'm the shit. So no, but I'm just saying, I'm just saying, like, this is such a no-brainer because we can't get anything through Congress at the moment. The White House can do this through the Education Act of 1965 or something. The Secretary of Education can do it, has the power. Why not do it? If someone's going to sue us to stop us, let the Republicans sue us to stop us. But like, why not make lives better for a whole generation of people that who will become more loyal to Democrats and be able to participate in the economy at a higher, better level?
Totally. One of the things that's like very predictable about Joe Biden is that he really likes to do things that seem like targeted and smart and like just. And so, and as Joe Biden says, God love him, he's doing some really good stuff on canceling student debt for very niche sections of the population, right? Folks who got ripped off by for-profit schools, or they're investigating whether they can do something specific for students who went to historically Black colleges and universities. And like, that's great. The piecemeal way of doing it, like rock and roll, the more people who lose, who don't have to pay back this like crippling student debt, the better. But maybe that's like an interesting policy way of doing things. That is not how the political arm of this all works. We need grand sweeping gestures that will reach people who are working two jobs to recognize, holy smokes, Joe Biden just did something awesome for me and literally everyone I know, rather than like a targeted piecemeal Section 2B kind of approach to this. And so I think that there's a growing movement, and there's lots of folks, who are really recognizing this can be a powerful force, right? Folks who have student debt. And again, we're talking about interesting coalitions. AARP and the National Realtors Association are involved in student debt conversations now because young people or even Gen Xers are retiring and they still have their student debt, or they can't afford a house because they're paying back their debt. So I think we have a lot of movement building to do, but I think we can push Biden to do it, and is the short answer.
I just wanted to point out that the National Association of Realtors is one of the most Republican special interest groups in our politics. They give almost all their money to Republicans. They're as right-wing as they come. So you saying that, and I see obviously the obvious self-interest, right? You need people to have money to be able to buy houses. But for them to be aboard shows that there is a trans ideological coalition, because it makes sense. And the only argument against it is that some people may feel like they got ripped off because there's two I can think of. One is I paid off my student loans, not realizing that it was a lot cheaper to go to college 50 years ago than it is today. And the other argument I could see against it is that, some rural conservative Republicans thinking that that their taxes are helping liberal children get ahead of their own children who didn't go to college. So that sort of rural urban divide, but that divide exists. It's there. It's not going away. So screw them.
Totally. And like the thing that's interesting, it's not like I think there's a lot of those conservative Republicans will say, well, oh, you took out a loan from a bank and you have to pay back the bank. It's not the bank. Over $1 trillion of the student debt is held by the federal government. Like, They could just press the delete key somewhere in the Treasury building and like it goes away. It's not like we're not messing with the private sector or anything here. For the vast majority of the student debt is held by the government. And if we got rid of that, it would help so many people.
It's just, I know. you talked about
We've pulled this, and among people of color, young people of color, it pulls between like 65% and 75% or something like that. For Black folks and for Latino folks, it does. For young people of color.
And it's one of the smartest and easiest ways to close the racial wealth gap in this country, yes, which is something that the Biden administration talks about on a daily basis. So like, I think they get it. I think they're trying to figure out what are the politics on this. And as you all just explained, they're actually rather simple. And I think they're worried about, they don't want to get sued up the wazoo, but guess what? They're going to get sued up the wazoo on everything. So like, might as well do the things you want to do.
No, and this one's worth fighting for. Definitely. So 2022 is coming up. We need the youth turnout. I mean, there's always a historical drop off in the midterms, but that's true for everybody. But as a percentage, it's bigger among youth voters. How can Democrats avoid that drop off and avoid, as a result, losing control of Congress? Because that would be the end of the Biden presidency, essentially.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's a few, Ben's 3 easy steps to make sure that young people show up in 2022. I don't know. I'm making this up as I go along. So if there's more than 3, don't blame me. So the first thing, one of the reasons that I think we saw such expansion in the youth vote in 2018 and 2020 is election administration. Making it easier for young people to vote means that young people vote. Right. And so when you look at some of the numbers from COVID, the fact that every young person got mailed a ballot, just like every old person in many states, meant that more young people actually could vote. Right. So there are so many simple, easy fixes, whether it's automatic voter registration or mailing everyone a ballot, that can actually make a real difference in turning young people out. Not surprisingly, Republicans don't want this to happen. And we have this, legislative battle that you all have talked about at length about over the Senate Bill 1 and, reinstating some sense of normalcy or fairness in our elections. And I think the federal battle will rage on, but at the state level and at the county level, we see lots of great Democratic election administrators ensuring that it's easier for young people to access the ballot. I think my favorite example is in Michigan, where in 2018, we basically passed a ballot measure that would make it easier for young people to vote by automatically registering young people. Then we saw a huge spike in 2020. Now we have Jocelyn Benson, who's the Secretary of State, up for re-election in 2022, saying, hey, we need to make sure that everybody can continue to automatically register to vote and vote easily. And when that happens, good things beget good things. So number one is election administration. I think a second thing that we have to do is pass popular policy and then tell young people about it, right? I think when you are broke, like many young people, you don't spend a lot of time, hanging out, finding out what just passed through Congress. And so the fact that even in the giant America's Rescue Plan, there are so many nuggets of gold for young people. For example, this expansion of the child tax credit, young parents are basically getting $500 checks a month in some instances, and they might not really know about it. They probably don't follow Joe Biden on Twitter and check it on a daily basis.
And they refused to put his name on the checks, which would be an obvious, easy thing to do.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, well, let's poll that question, see if we think he should do it. But I do think the number two, it's about doing popular things, which I think the Democrats are doing in every case they can, and then bragging about it, right? Being out there loudly in interesting spaces, talking about it, right? Going, and I commend the White House. I think they've done a really good job, identifying good social media influencers to help carry this message or really tapping into the cultural vein. So do popular things and brag about it, I guess, would be number two. And then number three, which is kind of election campaigns 101, is register young voters. It is bananas how many people turn 18 every day and how many people forget that midterm elections can be won and lost in a congressional district by 1,000 votes. And they don't invest in these large scale voter registration efforts. They being massive donors, they being the Democratic Party, they being, some of the do-gooder corporations out there, they just don't think of voter registration necessarily as their responsibility. But I think we could win almost every midterm and presidential election if we actually got off our butts and registered young people. Obviously, that's what NextGen America, an organization I ran for years, does a lot. It's why we push for automatic voter registration in many of these states. Young people, once they're registered, they actually show up in pretty similar numbers of older people. The reason the turnout numbers for young people are so much lower than older people is because so few of them are registered. And that's something that we can all do in our lives. I know I'm like a little hokey activist field organizer pitch right now, but we all know someone who's turning 18, or we know someone who knows someone who's turning 18 who isn't registering to vote. And so those are the three, I guess. Carrie, did I do three? I've got.
Yeah, you did three. I'm not going to subject anybody to my writing here, but number one was election administration. Number two was do popular policies and brag about it. That's for the Democrats, of course. No Republican bragging. And sure. Number three is register young voters. So that's the formula. And let me get. Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Let me get back to number two, which is do the popular policy thing and brag about it, right? Let's sure. Make sure we know I'm on this kick of Jesus, do something for young voters. My goodness. So I had this one quote that I read in the Washington Post of a young voter who was explaining why he voted in 2020. And I think he was almost eligible to vote in 2016. And he was like, well, I don't really, I'm paraphrasing, but he was like, I could never really understand this whole idea of the filibuster and whatever. But then I saw our president losing his mind every day on Twitter. And I just thought I should get to the polls. It's like, so which is true, right? Like
totally
Trump motivated people, including young people, to get to the polls. But my point is that for Democrats, it's not good enough to be loosely associated with good ideas that a lot of the millennial and Gen Z voters like. It's not good enough. You have to do something on the positive side of that. Some of those people got to the polls simply because Donald Trump scared the living crap out of them.
Existential threat, but that existential threat is they think it's gone. It's not.
Right.
But they think it's gone.
I think that's all spot on. I mean, I think one of the things is that for, again, young people, like I have never known in my life a functioning Congress. Right. Nobody, and it's sad, but it's true. Nobody expects government to actually get stuff done, who's my generation or younger. And so when you can say we are breaking that cycle and we need your help to do it, that's when I think we can overcome some of the natural skepticism. It's not apathy, it's skepticism or cynicism, and start to give a little bit of, hope that things can change. And I think like the best examples are going to be on climate action. If we can say, we understand this is a generational threat to your generation, we're going to take massive investment action on transitioning to a clean energy economy, which obviously Democrats are trying to do, one. Two, I think canceling student debt. We recognize you're broke and that sucks. And we want to find a way to make you less broke. And then third, by saying, honestly, that we need to have a national reckoning on race and criminal justice, and that when Democrats are in charge, we actually make it easier to be a Black person or a brown person in this country through policy X, Y, and Z. And one of the things that's so interesting about those things, some of that is Congress and some of that is your mayor or your city council. And so there's a lot of different levels where Democrats can actually do something and then go out and brag about it. And it's not, this is like, we have to remember the brag about it part, because everybody thinks everyone watches C-SPAN all the time if you live inside the Beltway, and it's nuts. And so there's so many good things that Democrats do. And Obama complains about this in his book. He's like, we did so many things and then the voters never heard about it. And it's like, yeah, bro, that's your job too. And so we have to make sure that national Democrats are getting that done as well.
The you got your list, and Republicans know this list, right? You talk about election administration. Obviously, they are directly targeting election administration. You talk about policy. They are systematically objecting to absolutely everything, and they have, unfortunately, they have the help of Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin in that, which is why the sort of just signing a check, Biden unilaterally forgiving $50,000 in student debt is so critical because we have a Congress where things are going to move slowly. They're going to get watered down. It's just a reality. If anything passes at all, it's not going to be the best. Here is something that he can do by himself unilaterally, and he's afraid to do it, and so you need to find those places where you can make the grand gesture. That's the other thing. Democrats love their block grants and their tax, credits, and nobody notices like tax credit on when they're doing their taxes because it's just computed automatically with their TurboTax or whatever they're using. So that piece is making that grand gesture, and Republicans are doing everything possible to stymie that because they know that the youth vote is easy to suppress because it's a low performing group, and if they turn out, it's existential for them. So how much of this, and you also talk about young people, really, voters don't know what's happening, and young people are, they want to, like, I got teens, right? They're listening to music, they're trying to hook up. I mean, that's their life. And I'm good.
Old people also listen to music and are trying to hook up. I'm just going to say that. It's important that we recognize that.
I like that you finally recognize that you're an old person.
I don't think he was talking about himself. I think he was talking about actual old people.
Okay. All right.
Everyone. I'm down for whoever wants to do whatever.
Is there any sense with those young people at all? I mean, do you get any sense that the Republican Party is seen as actively working against their interests? Or is that sort of too abstract for broadly speaking, these younger generations?
Yeah, but that's a super good question. I mean, one of the things that is so interesting for young people that we've polled or that we've seen in focus groups is that Republican equals Trump and Trump equals Republican, right? And anything we can do to continue to marry those brands together, I think is going to increase the odds of young people recognizing how much the Republican Party is out to get them. We have so many voters who are either first-time voters and 18 or 20 who voted for Democrats, whose parents are Republican, or who everyone they went to high school with is Republican. And that's who they think of when they think of what's a Republican. They think of, oh, okay, my dad who worked hard all his life and sometimes says some racist stuff about immigrants. Like, that's a Republican to them. It's not Donald Trump and all these people who are screwing over our country, right? And so we have some branding work to do as a Democratic Party or as a progressive to ensure that folks really recognize who our opposition is, which is people that are less interested in having pluralist democracy than they are in letting Donald Trump and his family do whatever the heck they want. And so I have hope, but it doesn't happen naturally, right? It requires some real work. And luckily, the Republican Party seems to be helping us. I mean, they've all but
Speaker
changed
Donald Trump
their name. Yeah, I know. Like I think that there's a lot of work that could be done, and that we have to do it in a way, like Carrie, you mentioned, that's not just about negative partisanship. It's not just you hate Republicans, so show up to vote. It's you hate Republicans, and Democrats are going to do some good things for you, so show up to vote. I think that's the way that we make the difference here. And I will say one other thing about this, which is like, I think gets lost in the conversation a lot about young people, where we almost exclusively talk about turnout, but candidate support. We saw John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock basically get like 2/3 to almost 70% of young people to show up, who showed up voting for them. Like, that is like a real lopsided seesaw that we don't normally see in this country. And then when you look, I mean, Joe Biden won white young people. Like, it's the only cohort of white people that Joe Biden won. And so, but it was like 51-49. And so those little things that happen at the margin, obviously, like, turnout is the big sexy thing. And when you look at this largest generation ever, that's where your mind goes. But the candidate choice, the persuasion, making sure that those young people are still supporting Democrats or aren't defecting to Republicans, that's just as much work. And it's just as important in this margin game of a midterms.
Let me just repeat that. You said that in Georgia, 70% of the young voters who showed up in that runoff voted for Ossoff and Warnock. Is that right?
Yeah, that's basically the exit poll estimate.
Wow.
I mean, it pays to have candidates that actually look like you too, right? Having a young candidate like John Ossoff was probably a big factor. Ben, that's all the time we have. Unfortunately, this time flew. thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we can check in with you later in the year, maybe as the election season starts heating up, and we can continue to take a look at this youth vote, how it's evolving, because it's going to be absolutely critical for our ability to win in 2022. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks to y'all for doing the work. Appreciate it.
Carrie, that's all the time we have. Thanks to Ben for joining us and being such an informative guest. Thank you, Carrie, for being such a great partner in this endeavor. Thanks to Walter Einenkelt for producing the show, and thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to subscribe and give us a rating wherever you get your podcasts. You can always talk to us at dailykos.com or on Twitter at Daily Kos. That's Daily Kos. See you next week.